I used to think birthdays were supposed to be magical, the one day a year where family made you feel special, where love was wrapped in ribbons and laughter. But on the night that should have been mine, I learned that in my parents' world, I was never meant to shine. Because all the sparkle, all the applause, all the love, belonged to my sister. The memory is burned into me like a scar. The living room was packed with relatives, friends, neighbors, even balloons floating against the ceiling, the smell of vanilla cake thick in the air, and there in the driveway sat a brand new BMW. Gleaming under the porch lights, a giant blue bow tied around the hood like something out of a commercial. My sister squealed, tears streaming down her face as she jumped up and down, my parents clapping, cameras flashing, everyone chanting her name like she had just won the lottery. For our perfect girl, my dad shouted proudly, and I watched as my sister threw herself into their arms, their golden child, their pride and joy, while I stood in the corner holding my breath, praying there was some mistake, that maybe, just maybe, I had something waiting for me too. But when my turn came, when my mom pressed something into my hand with a tight smile, it wasn't keys, it wasn't even a wrapped gift, it was 3 crumpled dollar bills, shoved into my palm as if that was all my worth. Here, Vanessa, she said quickly, already turning back to admire the car, go buy yourself something nice. I stared at the money, my cheeks burning, my throat closing as laughter and cheers swirled around me. $3. $3 for years of straight A's, for nights spent babysitting my sister so my parents could go out, for all the times I was told to wait my turn, to be patient, to understand. I forced a smile, shoved the bills into my pocket, but inside I was crumbling. My uncle patted me on the shoulder and muttered something about how not everyone could get a car, as if that was supposed to soothe the wound splitting me open. My sister, meanwhile, was already revving the engine, her friends piling in, their screams of excitement echoing into the night while I stood invisible in the shadows of my own home. The final blow came when my dad raised a toast, glass high, his voice booming, to our star, the daughter who deserves the world. Not one word about me. Not a glance. Not even a thank you for being there. In that moment, I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was just the background, the afterthought, the placeholder in a family that had already chosen who mattered. My hands shook as I helped cut the cake, my fake smile plastered on while relatives asked me what I got and I lied, saying something small, because I couldn't bring myself to admit the truth. That night, when the party ended and the house grew quiet, I sat in my room staring at those 3 bills on my desk, my tears soaking them until the ink bled. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, every time I swallowed the hurt, every time I told myself they loved me just as much, but showed it differently. And then I thought about the car in the driveway, the bow that seemed to mock me with its perfection, and I knew something had shattered inside me. At midnight, I started packing. By 2 a.m., my bag was full, my phone buzzing with my sister's photos of her new BMW plastered all over social media, hashtags about being spoiled and blessed stabbing me like knives. I blocked them all, every number, every contact, and with my heart pounding in my ears, I slipped out into the night. The street was silent, the air sharp, and as I walked away from the only home I had ever known, those $3 in my pocket felt heavier than gold, not because of their value, but because they were the proof, the undeniable truth, that in my parents' eyes, I was worth nothing. And for the first time in my life, I decided I wasn't going to let them decide my worth ever again. The night I walked out at 2 a.m., the world felt colder than I had ever known, not just because the autumn air bit at my skin, but because for the first time in my life I was truly alone, no safety net, no parents to call, no family waiting for me at the end of the block. I dragged my suitcase down the silent street, the wheels rattling against the cracked pavement, each sound a reminder of how final this was. I didn't have a plan, I didn't have savings, I didn't even have friends I could crash with without raising questions, because for so long my life had revolved around keeping the family afloat, watching my sister, cleaning up the house, playing the dutiful daughter while they poured everything into her. When I finally reached the bus station, I sat on a hard plastic bench with my bag clutched to my chest, staring at the 3 crumpled dollar bills that had started this spiral, wondering if I was insane to think I could survive with nothing but pride and rage to fuel me. I bought the cheapest ticket I could, A one-way ride to the city 2 hours away, and as the bus rumbled through the dark, I pressed my forehead against the window and cried silently, the reflection of my tear-streaked face staring back at me, asking, "What now?" When I arrived, the city was waking up, commuters rushing past me as if I didn't exist, and I realized quickly that invisibility wasn't just in my parents' house, it followed me everywhere. I rented the cheapest room I could find, a dingy studio with peeling paint and a lock that barely worked, the kind of place you pray no one notices you coming in or out of. My first meal was a vending machine sandwich, my first night filled with the sound of sirens instead of my sister's laughter, and yet, as broken as I felt, I told myself I had to push through. But the truth was, those first weeks nearly crushed me. I bounced between temp jobs, handing out flyers, bussing tables, cleaning offices, anything that paid just enough to cover rent. Some nights I went to bed hungry, other nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life by leaving, if I should have just swallowed the pain and stayed invisible in that house. My phone buzzed constantly at first, calls from my parents, texts from relatives asking why I was being dramatic, my sister sending selfies with her new car captioned, "Still winning." I blocked them all, but the screenshots and whispers still found their way to me through mutual friends, each one reopening the wound. I tried to remind myself why I left, replaying that moment of humiliation, the $3 shoved into my palm, but when you're sitting alone in a freezing apartment with an empty fridge, the clarity starts to blur. One night, after another long shift cleaning offices, I walked past a car dealership downtown, and there it was, a BMW with a blue bow in the window, just like the one my sister had been gifted. My knees nearly buckled as I stared at it, the memory crashing back so vividly I had to grip the glass to steady myself. For a moment, I hated myself for leaving, hated that my pride had led me here, struggling while she cruised around in luxury. But then I remembered Grandpa's words, the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered, echoing in my head, "Vanessa, you can't measure your worth by what others give you. You measure it by what you build yourself." My tears blurred the BMW in the window until it vanished into streaks of light, and I realized I had a choice: let my parents' cruelty define me, or fight to define myself. I walked home that night with blistered feet, but a spark in my chest, small but growing, telling me that rock bottom wasn't the end, it was the foundation. And from that cracked, painful place, I was going to build something so strong that one day, when they thought of me, it wouldn't be as the daughter who left with nothing, but as the woman who left and became everything. For weeks I lived in that cracked little studio, surviving on noodles and vending machine snacks, dragging myself from one miserable job to the next, pretending to strangers that I was fine when inside I was crumbling. But the more I replayed the night of my sister's big gift, the cheers, the flash of the BMW's headlights under that ridiculous blue bow, the more something inside me hardened into resolve, because if my parents thought $3 was all I was worth, then I was determined to prove them wrong, not by begging for their approval, but by building a life so untouchable that their opinions would mean nothing. The decision came one night after a shift bussing tables at a restaurant where customers treated me like I was invisible, their scraps tossed onto plates I carried to the back, grease soaking into my hands. I was scrubbing dishes when my phone lit up with a notification from social media. Against my better judgment, I clicked it, and there she was, my sister, posing next to the BMW in a designer jacket, her caption reading, "Some people are just born to win. #spoiled, #BMW life." The comments were filled with relatives congratulating her, friends calling her lucky, and even my parents chiming in with heart emojis. Something snapped in me then, not sadness, not jealousy, but fury, the kind that doesn't burn out but sharpens into clarity. I dried my hands, walked out into the alley behind the restaurant, and stared up at the night sky as the city hummed around me, and I thought, enough. If they won't value me, I'll value myself. That was the night I made the decision to cut them off completely, not just by blocking their calls, but by cutting them out of my heart, out of my future, out of everything I was going to build. I took the 3 crumpled bills I still kept tucked in my wallet, a reminder of the night I stopped being their daughter, and I taped them above my bed, not as a wound, but as fuel, a symbol of how little they thought of me and how much I was going to rise beyond it. The next morning, I quit my string of temp jobs and threw myself into something I had always been afraid to try, applying for internships in graphic design, the one thing I had loved since high school but never pursued because my parents said it wasn't practical. I used the free Wi-Fi at the library, stayed up all night polishing my portfolio with sketches I had saved, emailing every company I could find. Most never responded, some rejected me outright, but one small startup took a chance and called me in. I walked into their office shaking, clutching my worn-out sketchbook, and walked out with an unpaid internship that felt like gold because for the first time, someone was willing to look at my work, not just my worthlessness. The hours were brutal. I worked late nights cleaning offices just to afford food while spending my days at the startup, but I didn't care because every line I drew, every project I touched, reminded me that I was finally building something of my own. Slowly, painfully, the pieces began to shift. My boss at the startup noticed my dedication, my ideas, and within months I was offered a paid position, small at first, but enough to let me breathe. I bought real groceries, I fixed the broken lock on my door, and each little step forward felt like a victory against the people who thought I would crumble. I didn't unblock them, not once. Every time my phone buzzed with unknown numbers, I deleted them, refusing to let their poison back in. Because my decision wasn't just to survive without them, it was to thrive without them, to make sure that when they looked for me in the future, they would see someone they could no longer control, no longer diminish, no longer own. And though I was still far from the life I wanted, each morning when I woke up and saw those 3 bills taped above my bed, I smiled, because they were no longer a reminder of what I lacked, they were a reminder of why I was going to win. Starting over felt like learning to walk again, every step shaky, every stumble threatening to send me crashing back to the ground. But I refused to crawl back to the people who had broken me, even when the loneliness hit like a punch to the gut. The design startup where I'd landed my first chance was tiny, cramped, and barely afloat, but to me it felt like the golden gates of possibility. At first, I was terrified they'd see me for what I feared. I was just a girl with no degree, no luxury upbringing, no BMW with a bow in the driveway to show off. But instead of judgment, what they saw in me was hunger. They noticed how I stayed long after others clocked out, sketching until my fingers cramped, how I taught myself new software by watching tutorials at 3 a.m., how I'd run errands and fetch coffee if it meant sitting in on meetings and soaking up knowledge. Slowly, that turned into trust, and that trust turned into opportunity. I worked insane hours, mornings at the office, evenings bussing tables or cleaning offices to pay rent, nights spent practicing design skills on a borrowed, half-broken laptop. My body ached, my bank account hovered near zero, but my heart beat with a fire I had never felt at home. For the first time, my effort translated into recognition, not dismissal. My ideas began to slip into small campaigns, my sketches turned into logos that hung in storefronts around the city, and each time I spotted one of them while walking to work, I felt a surge of pride stronger than any hollow, good job my parents had ever given me. Still, the climb was brutal. I cried in bathroom stalls after rejections, sat on the floor of my apartment eating instant noodles and wondering if I should have just swallowed my humiliation, and stayed the forgotten daughter in the background of my sister's BMW story. But then my eyes would fall on the 3 wrinkled dollar bills taped above my bed, and the anger, the humiliation, the sheer absurdity of it all would jolt me back into focus. Those bills were no longer just paper, they were the fuel for my rebellion, the reminder that I had nothing to lose because my family had already stripped everything away. As months bled into a year, my life began to shift. I left behind the crumbling studio with its broken lock and moldy windows for a shoebox apartment that at least let in sunlight and felt like my own. I bought real groceries, cooked meals that made me feel human again, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living instead of just surviving. My biggest victory came the day I bought my own car. It wasn't a luxury BMW with leather seats and vanity plates. It was a dented, second-hand Toyota Corolla with a squeaky door and a radio that barely worked. But when I turned the key and heard the engine roar, tears poured down my cheeks, because it wasn't about the brand, it was about freedom. That car was mine, earned with my sweat, my exhaustion, my stubborn refusal to give up. No one had handed it to me with a bow. I had built it mile by mile, dollar by dollar, and that made it worth more than any BMW in the world. Opportunities at work grew. My boss pulled me aside one afternoon, sliding one of my designs across the table, and said, "Vanessa, you've got something special. Have you thought about leading a project?" My throat closed with emotion, but I nodded, and for the first time, I wasn't just part of the team, I was steering it. Long nights turned into successful campaigns, my name began to circulate in industry circles, and clients requested me personally. With each step up, I felt myself shedding the skin of the forgotten daughter, becoming someone new, someone strong, someone undeniable. And yet, even in my new life, the ghosts of my past lingered. My phone, though still blocked from my parents and sister, lit up with unknown numbers I knew were theirs. A cousin messaged me once saying, "Your parents are worried. Maybe you should talk." But I deleted it without replying. Another time, a mutual friend told me my sister's car payments had caught up with her, that she was drowning in debt and begging my parents for help. I shrugged it off. It wasn't my burden anymore. They made their choices, just like I made mine. But the real test of my resolve came one afternoon when I was walking downtown, portfolio in hand, heading to meet a potential client. Parked at the curb, gleaming under the sun, was a BMW with a blue bow perched proudly on its hood, just like the one my sister had been gifted. For a second, the memory hit me so hard my knees buckled. The party, the cheers, the humiliation of clutching $3 measly while my parents toasted to my sister's bright future. My stomach twisted, tears threatened to spill, and for a moment I felt like the invisible girl again. But then, as I caught my reflection in the car's tinted window, I saw not the forgotten child, but the woman I had become. Dressed professionally, holding a portfolio filled with real achievements, walking toward a meeting I had earned myself, me, not them. My chest swelled, my tears dried, and I smiled at my reflection. That vow no longer mocked me. It reminded me of how far I had come. The life I was building wasn't easy, it wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't gifted. But it was mine. Every success, every setback, every scar was earned, and that made it unshakable. And though I didn't know it yet, the day was coming when my past and present would collide, when my parents, my sister, and their BMW would crash headfirst into the life I had created. And they would see with their own eyes that the girl they thought was worth only $3 had built a future worth far more than their shallow gifts could ever buy. 2 years after I walked out at 2 a.m. with 3 crumpled dollars in my pocket, the email that would tie my past to my present landed in my inbox with a subject line that made my breath hitch: family emergency. For a full minute I just stared at it, pulse thudding in my ears, the cursor blinking like a dare. I could have deleted it the way I deleted 100 vague messages and unknown numbers, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe the last thread I hadn't cut, made me open it. It was from my mother's sister, the relative who had always stayed politely neutral. "Your parents are hosting a fundraiser at the country club. They want to reconnect. Your sister asked if you could come. She's been having a hard time." I almost laughed at the choreography of it. A public event, a safe crowd, a setting they could script. Old me might have shown up to be background scenery. The woman I had become closed the laptop, finished my client deck, and went back to leading a pitch that would cover a quarter of my yearly revenue. But that night, as the city thrummed beneath my apartment windows and my secondhand Corolla ticked as it cooled in the street, I realized what I wanted wasn't revenge with fireworks. I wanted a full stop. I wanted to look the people who measured my worth in ribbon and banknotes in the eye and say, calmly, no more. So I wrote back, "I can come. 1 hour. Neutral ground." The club smelled like lemon polish and old money. I arrived alone, hair pulled back, navy suit, a portfolio tucked under my arm out of habit more than need. I didn't need armor anymore. I had receipts, the kind you can't crumple. The lobby door slid open to a room glittering with glassware and small talk, and there they were, my parents, faces pressed into smiles that wobbled at the edges, and my sister, thinner than I remembered, gripping her clutch like a life raft. For a heartbeat the room blurred into the memory of a driveway and a blue bow, but I blinked and the picture snapped into now. My mother reached for me first. "Vanessa, you look successful." My father nodded like I was a quarterly report that exceeded guidance. I let the silence stretch until their smiles trembled. You invited me, I said. Say what you need. The first fissure appeared then. My father's eyes flicked to my sister, my mother's hand tightened on her wrist, and the truth spilled out in careful, curated phrases. Setbacks, payments, a lost job, a loan cosign gone sideways. The BMW floated between us like a ghost. Finally, my sister whispered, "They're going to take the car." The words landed with the dull thud of a chapter ending. 2 years ago, I would have tasted bitterness, counted interest in my head, begged to be seen. Now I just nodded. Let them. They blinked, as if the script called for tears and pleas, and I'd shown up with an entirely different play. My sister's chin trembled. Do you hate me? I thought of midnight packing, of noodles eaten on the floor, of my hands shaking on the Corolla's steering wheel the first time I drove it home, and I found to my shock that the answer was no. Hate would have chained me to them. I don't, I said, voice steady. I just don't belong to you anymore. My father bristled, the "I paid for your childhood" reflex sparking behind his eyes, so I met him clean. I built a life, I said, with nothing from you. I'm not here for money or apologies rehearsed for a crowd. I'm here to return what you gave me. I reached into my wallet, unfolded a plastic sleeve, and slid 3 bills onto the linen tablecloth. Crisp, framed, uncreased, replaced long ago, but truer for it. The same denomination. The same lesson. You gave me $3, I said softly. You taught me what I was worth to you. I learned to set my own price. A few heads turned, the fundraiser hummed dipping. My mother flushed the color of broken porcelain. My sister covered her mouth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room carried my words for me. Before anyone could pivot to a smoother topic, a manager in a black suit approached our cluster and murmured something to my sister. Her face went white. Through the glass of the front doors we could see it, almost cinematic, a flatbed tow truck idling at the curb, hazard lights blinking like a metronome. A man with a clipboard waited, bored, professional. The valet held out a small basket of keys and a carbon copy form. It's a mix-up, my father snapped, already stalking toward the foyer, but the kind of problems money solves don't ask for signatures, they ask for balances, and those had already been measured and found wanting. My sister's fingers dug crescents into her clutch. Please, Vanessa, can you just— She didn't finish the sentence. We both heard the end of it echoing. Fix what we broke. 2 years ago, I would have footnoted myself right out of existence to keep the peace. The tow operator lifted the BMW's front wheels with a hydraulic sigh. Somewhere in the lobby, a string quartet shifted keys without missing a beat. I looked at my sister's face and felt something like grief and something like relief pass through me in a single clean wave. I can't, I said. But I can tell you this, no object will make you enough. Not a badge, not a bow. I slid a business card across the table, not a personal lifeline, just a boundary with a door. If you want help building from the ground up, call me in the morning. If you want a rescue tonight, I'm not your person. My hour ended the way my life had begun again, with me walking out under my own power. On the sidewalk, the autumn air had that first bite of the season. The tow truck eased away, the BMW's glossy nose pointing toward a different chapter. I unlocked my Corolla, ran a thumb over the cracked plastic on the key fob, and felt something unclench in my chest I didn't know I was still holding. On impulse, I drove not home but to the hill that overlooked the city. I parked, killed the engine, and let the silence rush in. Lights glittered like circuitry. Somewhere a train moaned. A breeze flicked hair across my cheek. I thought about the girl in a borrowed coat staring at a bus schedule with $3 and a breaking heart. I wanted to tell her everything about clients who would learn her name, about a tiny team that would become her chosen family, about a dented car that would smell like coffee and possibility, but she already knew the only part that mattered. She knew how to walk. Months later, a different email arrived. Subject line, proposal. A national retailer wanted my studio to lead a full rebrand campaign, packaging, digital, the works. It was the kind of project people move cities for, and it came not because I'd begged a gatekeeper, but because 2 years of small, excellent work had whispered my name up the ladder until it reached the right ear. I signed the contract, printed the first invoice, and tacked a photocopy of it above my desk next to a shadow box frame that held 3 bills under glass. Not a trophy. A compass. When the first payment hit, I took my team, to the dealership off the freeway with the blue bow display in the window. We didn't look at luxury. We looked at reliability, at cargo space for foam boards, at road trip seats that wouldn't kill your back at hour 6 on I-5. We drove out in a slate gray hybrid with a warranty and a monthly that made sense. I handed the keys to my lead designer and told her to put miles on them. Power isn't what you park in. It's what you build and who you bring with you. My parents didn't vanish. People that formative never do. They sent careful holiday cards with blank spaces where contrition should go. I sent polite thank yous and kept the boundary intact. My sister called one morning from a bus stop, breath fogging in the cold, voice small in a way I hadn't heard since we were kids. "I want to start over," she said. "No shortcuts. Teach me how to earn it." I believed her, but I believed myself more. "Okay," I said. "Show up Monday. 9 a.m. You'll start at reception, not design. You'll sweep floors before you pitch logos. And you'll never ask me for a bow." She laughed, a raw, surprised sound. Deal. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a starting line. The only kind that lasts. Sometimes, on the anniversary of the night I left, I drive past my old block. The house looks smaller, memory always edits for drama. In my mind's eye, I still see the driveway lit like a stage, the bow bright enough to bruise. But that image no longer stings. It instructs. In the end, they did give me a gift, one I carry every day. Not the car, not the cash, not the applause. They gave me a perfect measure of how little I should accept from anyone who claims to love me. I took that measure, folded it into my pocket, and walked until the horizon stopped moving away. If you want a moral need enough to embroider, there isn't one. Life isn't a commercial. There's just a girl at 2 a.m. with a suitcase and $3, deciding that the only permission slip she'll ever need is her own. There's just a woman years later locking up her studio, flipping the light, and smiling at the quiet satisfaction of keys that are hers because she turned them. And there's a simple truth I wish I'd learned sooner, but I'm glad I learned at all. The blue bow was never for me. The road was.